What's up, you guys? Coach Sarah here for another weekly weight loss chat. I'm doing a series about stress eating and how to cope with stress eating. So this is currently video 4, I believe, of that series. And today we're talking about the third strategy for dealing with stress eating. So a quick refresher, video 1, I talked about how it's important to acknowledge that if you're trying to lose weight and you struggle with stress eating, then you need to find some kind of way to, if you are trying to lose weight and you struggle with stress eating, then it's important to acknowledge that you struggle with stress eating and make a plan for somehow replacing or supporting that habit in your life. Because if you don't make a plan for your stress eating, essentially you're planning to just stop stress eating. And if you're human and you deal with stress, then that's not a recipe for lasting change. So that was the video 1. The second video, I gave an overview of the 3 strategies that I find are the best way of dealing with stress eating. And then I also introduced the first one, which is to put boundaries around the food. So if you put certain boundaries around the food, that means you can still enjoy your food, but you don't go overboard. Simple as that. The second video was all about changing your coping mechanisms. So simple way of remembering this is that if all you have to do, if the only coping mechanism you have for stress is to sit on the couch and eat or drink, then you are imbalanced in your life. Like, there are other ways of coping as well as that, and you just need to find a way of leaning into those other ways. The third and final strategy that I have, I say final, the third strategy for dealing with stress eating is to change the stressor. So I want to be very clear about this, because I think it would be easy to sound flippant and say, like, oh yeah, whatever's stressing you out, just change it. And the reality is this strategy might be the most difficult one, because a lot of times when we are dealing with the kind of stress that just leaves us no other recourse other than to sit and eat, a lot of times we are deeply entrenched in that stress. Deeply entrenched in it, and changing it feels like the farthest thing from where we are. Like, it's the hardest thing we could possibly do. So what I'm thinking of here is, let's say you've got a job where your job doesn't give you the time to worry about putting boundaries around food, or there's no time to call a friend or book a spa day or whatever your new coping mechanism is. There's nothing. You're just going to work, you're eating, you're sleeping, you're going back to work, and in your spare time, you just want to do nothing. If that is an example of what you're dealing with, well, my friends, I hate to be the bearer of bad news, but that job, is it really worth it? Is it worth it to be spending a big chunk of your life doing that job, but not getting anything back from it? Or maybe you are getting back something from it, but I would just simply ask you, what are you getting back from it? Another example might be if you're in a relationship that's stressing you out. So again, these are all very difficult things to deal with. I'm not necessarily saying, oh, if you're married to someone, it's stressing you out, leave the marriage. I understand that is not, it's not that easy to do, right? So my point is, the path, if you were dealing with something like that, is to get really real with yourself and assess what your possible interventions may be. So maybe it's not necessarily like leaving a marriage, maybe it's addressing the issue with your partner, or maybe it's going to therapy, or, I mean, there's a whole host of things, right? But the idea is bringing intention to that area of your life rather than looking away from it and just eating to cope. There's a whole number of other scenarios that I'm sure I could come up with here, but I'm not going to. The point is, this third strategy is really I would argue the toughest, because it does ask us to make a big change in the way that we're living. Where, as you know, putting boundaries around your food, that might change and ebb and flow depending on where you are in life. But, you know, deciding to change careers or remove somebody from your life is a really big, a big step. So I do want to give a caveat. If you are in a situation where you're dealing with a ton of stress, but it's time bound, meaning, let's say you're getting ready to buy a house, or one that I'm very familiar with is raising a baby right now. Maybe you've got a baby that you're keeping alive. That's time bound. That's not going to last forever. So that is not something where I would say, just change the stressor, give the baby back. So that's another idea that I want to leave with you. My final thought, so what do I do with this? Especially if you're listening to this and you're like, Sarah, I'm not going to quit my job. I don't have other jobs lined up. This is stupid. What I would invite you to do is to just consider, let's say you could leave your job, or let's ask whatever part of you is a hard no, immediately saying like, no, my job is super stressful, but I could never do that. Let's ask that part of you to just step out of the room for a moment, and anything that you daydream with that lovely critical thinker outside of the room, you're not committing to do it. It's just simply, what could it look like if you did quit that job? What might it look like? What are some other options? And the options don't have to be, this is the best and final option in my life. It could be as simple as, you know what, I'm going to go work an hourly job until I get my stress under control, and then I'll start worrying about going back into my career path or whatever. And that same idea applies to anything. I know I keep harping at the job just because that's a very personal thing I've experienced in my life too. A job that was just so stressful that I didn't want to go train. I didn't want to go do any of those first and second line defense things that I talked about in the previous videos because I was too stressed. Well, guess what? That means the job isn't right? But if you have other things that you're dealing with, some other big stressors in your life, if you can change them, but you don't feel like you can, then basically the path is, let's just pretend that you could. What would you do instead? Or how would you change them? How might you change them? Not committing to that. Just because you come up with an idea doesn't mean that you have to enact it. So that is the third and final strategy for dealing with stress eating. Now, if you've heard all three of these and you're like, yeah, I've done all of those, but I still can't stop myself from eating, come back next week. I'm going to have a video especially for you. Have a good one.